And Uncle Tom is somebody who has sold out by embracing the white man, by becoming a Republican, by rejecting the idea that you're a victim, by supporting things like hard work, accountability, and low taxes, by refusing to think of yourself as a black person first, as opposed to as an American who is black.
Gingerwalla, welcome to Mundine's Truth Talking. And tonight's topic, of course, is Uncle Tom, the King and Queen of Coconut Island. We have a lot of what they call lateral violence against people who don't seem to toe the line or have the groupthink of what a Aboriginal person or a Torres Strait Islander person should be in Australia. There's a great documentary that came out by Larry Elder, which you just saw then, which is about Uncle Tom. And in Australia, it's more about coconut and coon and those type of words that are used against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who think different and want to have individuality and strive and move ahead in their communities and that. So we've got a great panel tonight. We've got Jacinta Price. We've got Dr. Tony Dillon, and of course we've got Josephine Cashman. Now, everyone knows Jacinta, everyone knows Tony Dillon from the Australian Catholic University, and of course Josephine is a lawyer and a former prosecutor. Now, when you look at what Larry Elder was talking about, and you see that people who are going ahead and making, working, getting income and putting a roof over their head for themselves and their family, and actually, getting educated and running businesses and doing things, you get this, and they think different. Like they have also some conservatives, like the group here. They cop up a pizzling from the left in regard to being called coconuts, being called people who are coons, being called Uncle Toms, and the list just goes on. So Jacinta, in looking at what Larry just was talking about, you and me apparently have been married and now the King and Queen of Coconut Island. So there we are right there. So you've been copying this, and all you've been doing is raising a very serious issue within the Indigenous community. Could you like to talk about what you've been talking about and also the abuse that you've been getting?
That's right. I mean, I've been raising several really important issues in the Indigenous community. One of the first being the abuse of children and neglect of Indigenous children in remote communities, not just remote communities, but the fact that, statistically it remains in critical conditions for Indigenous kids throughout many communities throughout Australia, as well as the whole family violence epidemic, which is off the charts for Indigenous Australians. And if you in fact shine a light on some of these truths, if you provide facts on some of these issues, you're attacked and regarded as a sellout, which is really concerning, given that there's a display of much more regard for perpetrators in Indigenous communities than there is for the victims. And also the fact that if we were to confront these issues, to come together to solve them, we would see a lot of other issues being alleviated. We would see lowered rates of incarceration. We would see homes being safer places for families and for children. We would very likely see kids getting an education because they're coming from safer homes, and the flow-on effects would be incredible. But we continually get this people buying into the victim mentality, which is spoken a lot about in the Uncle Tom documentary, is this buy-in to the victim mentality, which is driven largely by the left. And therefore, you know, when you're a victim, you can be controlled. You have no responsibility. That responsibility belongs to somebody else. And so, yeah, you know, I've been targeted over and over and over and over. I'm just sort of, it's like water off a duck's back, because I've grown used to it, which means I'm desensitized. And, you know, I mean, sometimes you just got to laugh at it. But it speaks volumes more about those individuals and that frame of mind, which is utterly detrimental for anybody, let alone Indigenous Australians, to go about with that form of thinking and that sort of attitude. They're not doing themselves any favours. I couldn't care less, you know, the sorts of nastiness they throw at me. But yeah, they're certainly not doing themselves any favours. They're demonstrating to the younger generation how to behave, you know, respectfully and politely. There is utter disregard for anyone with a different viewpoint to them. And the general idea is, without any evidence to support it, is apparently most Indigenous people think and feel this way, and we are the odd ones out, without any evidence to suggest that this is so. Because let's face it, none of this is evidence-based.
Yeah, correct. Josephine, now you as a former prosecutor, I'm sure you would have copped a fair bit, but looking at seeing that you're going out there and highlighting similar issues, and that to what Jacinta is in regard to domestic violence, in regard to how women are treated, and the problems that are happening in these communities, and how you were treated when you went to Canberra with those women, those elder women, and that. So and you've seen the documentary. So what's your experience in that as well?
Well, I have I think there are some parallels in the US, quite definitely, but I also think that there is an Aboriginal services industry that actually does control and tries to control what Aboriginal people do, how they speak, what they can do. And it really has, since the 1970s, taken a great hold of Aboriginal affairs. It was quite a great journey we've had, and Jacinta actually went with me down to an Aboriginal community called Walliga Lake. And the people on the ground don't get the services or this great money. I really feel Aboriginal people are used as weapons to wind up by people who not only don't have Aboriginal people's best interests, but Australia's interests in general. And it's interesting because I've recently spent a couple of months in Wilcannia, and me and the ladies, the elders there, did a survey of 10% of the population. And they really just want practical things, like they want enough room for their children as their homes expand. They want to own their own home. And these people are from the far left with their own agendas have controlled the agenda. So I think some of the responses from those people on the ground is, well, is there someone else who's going to make all the decisions for us? And so I think to counteract that, what we've been doing very successfully, and we're building real momentum, is to sit down and talk to people on the ground and really understand who the real enemies are.
Yeah, you're right. And I've actually retweeted some of your videos you've done where you interviewed people, and that, like Bruce Shillingsworth. Now, excellent job. We need to get more of that out there. Now, Tony, you're in academia. You've been around for this, and I've seen you cop a bit of stuff as well. So you're a bloke who seems to like to get the bruises. So so you saw the video on that as well, the documentary and that. So the situation in Australia, your father would have copped this too, because he was at the time of the Fitzgerald inquiry and a police officer.
Yeah, well, it was in his latter part of the career when he worked in the cross-cultural unit. Some Aboriginal people turned against him because he was a policeman. After all the hard work he had done, where he had the reputation, the integrity was out there for everyone to see, and you had, his own people, our own people, slagging off at him. So, I mean, that was a terrible thing to see. First of all, just about Larry Elder, I was speaking with a friend last night. I said, if I walked into a room and say Larry Elder and Thomas Sowell were there, I'd go up and kiss their feet. They've just done such a wonderful job of consolidating everything and bringing it together. But look, I was reflecting this afternoon in preparation for this. I was looking at my early drum articles from a decade ago, and I think until then, I had not heard the term coconut. I don't think I'd heard it. And from my very first drum article, I was, being called coconut, and I very quickly worked out what it was. But it was, and the term coconut is always used in place of an argument to what you're saying. As we all know, our critics really don't have much to say against us. So it's so convenient just to say coconut. Just like it's so convenient to say to anyone white, racist, to an Aboriginal person, it's so easy to say coconut.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and for some of the viewers out there, a coconut is an Indigenous person, a black person, a brown person who is brown on the outside, black on the outside, but white on the inside. So there really is, and it's been a very demeaning way. And you're right, Tony, that it's they don't have an argument. So when they don't have an argument, then it's about then insulting you and trying to cut you down with some of the worst racist comments I've ever heard. Now, coming up now is Carol Swan, and I'd like to hear what some of her comments on that, and then we can have a move on to a good discussion there.
Mm.
I never saw myself as handicapped because I was black, I was a woman, that I came from poverty. It was just not the way I processed the world. As someone who got a GED, went to a community college, then went on to get a 4-year degree, graduated magna cum laude, while I was working 40 hours a week, nights and weekends at the community college library. My life has taken many turns. I married at 16. I dropped out of school. By the time I was 21, I had 3 small children. I had no idea that I would end up going to college and becoming a university professor. Graduate school was very interesting for me in a lot of ways. I had this experience in a course that was being taught by a white female. She was actually a white liberal. At some point in the classroom, I'm sure I'd said something that really irked her, because she turned to me and she yelled, "You'll never be able to change the fact that you're a black woman." And I interpreted that to mean that I was handicapped, whether I knew it or not. There I learned that I was black, I was poor, I was a woman, and that I was not supposed to have accomplished the things that I had already accomplished, which was success. By then it was too late.
Look, one of the things I get really out of that commentary that Carol's talking about is that you're black. You're always going to be black, and therefore that's going to be negative, and you're going to be oppressed. I was involved in. Sometimes I get a bit crazy. I got involved in a Twitter conversation with this. He's a football player, actually, a black person who kept on saying to me, "Warren, no matter what you do in your life or how successful you are, you need to look in the mirror because you're black. You're going to be oppressed. Nothing, you're going to be always this oppressed person and that." And my major concern with that sort of negative approach, what are we telling our kids? Oh, don't get educated, don't do anything, because you're never going to really move ahead and achieve things just because you're black. So now black has become a negative thing. Is that your experience as well about how, Josephine, in regard to how people are just saying, "Oh, you're black, you're Indigenous, you're a person of colour," or whatever they call it, and therefore you're always going to be oppressed. The world's always going to be against you.
Well, I'm more like caramel, to be honest. But, I'll just say that the thing is, it's very, very condescending. It's extremely condescending. And it was interesting because before I studied law, I lived in an Aboriginal community actually at Wallaga Lake, and people it was bred in a fear of non-Indigenous people, and needing to sort of be upright and proper and have clean clothes and all this. But there's all this sort of talk. And, I was really concerned then with my young son because I wanted him to be able to walk into any room and own it. And as a first-class citizen of Australia, I think it's actually designed, and we went through this in Wilcannia with the women because they were like, even using Twitter, they were like, oh, well, we've been told we're not good enough and we have to do a course. Like some of these people got 50 courses they've done, to prepare them for work. Like, just be yourself. Just be yourself because it is fine. But I think it's the real thing here is that this video should be in every school. This video, those sort of stories, because human beings, have always had to overcome things, and that's what makes you an amazing and well-rounded human being. The idea that anyone lives in any space as any human being without some form of trauma is not correct. And for me, this is a form of mind control to undermine Aboriginal people and wind them up so that they can be used as racist pawns for white people. And I actually think enough's enough, and the people on the ground actually want real practical support.
Yeah, look, Tony, when you're looking at this negativity, as Josephine's talking about, where just because you're black, you're always going to be oppressed. There's no way you're going to be able to move forward. I always looked at the Jewish people after the Second World War, where here's 6 million of their people were killed in the concentration camps and they was used as slave labour and that, and that's only 70 years ago, and that I just admire how they've taken that on and moved ahead as a people, rather than swallowing around in this negativity.
Yeah, look, we're never ever victims of the past. We're only ever victims of our view of the past. And even closer to home, here in Australia, we've got wonderful Aboriginal people who are many are doing amazing things, leaders in their community. Many are just your ordinary next door neighbour, salt of the earth type people, but they're doing so well. They're not just surviving, they're thriving, and they don't carry around this transgenerational trauma baggage which they're supposed to have. And for those who say that they don't have it, they're the ones who are usually called coconut.
That's right. It's so you just got to just lay in the mud and just not move forward and just have this victim mentality about yourself. It's one of the strong things that my parents and your parents and everyone else in this conversation did to us. They said, do not become a victim. Stand up and fight and move forward. Get a job, get an education, and do things. Is that the similar stuff that you were told as well, Jacinta? Because I look at your mother and your parents, and I look at your family. Yeah.
Look, I grew up in a household filled with love. I grew up understanding that I was a human, nothing more, not any different because of the colour of my skin. The only differences that existed were in terms of the cultural differences, and our lives were about manoeuvring our way through to be successful human beings and bringing these two cultures together. The colour of our skin made no difference whatsoever. It was simply the cultures that we came from, and my mother being a Warrapari woman and the rest of my family being just Warrnambool. They never went around saying, oh, I'm Indigenous, I'm this, I'm that. It was just, they were just being human and accepting of other humans and really intrigued by physical difference in others, but of the understanding that we're just all human. And, I had incredible love from my Indigenous family and also my father's side of the family. So, the white fella side of the family. So I grew up understanding that I was human, and really those differences crept up. I have been imported sort of politically from other parts of the country, I believe, because in the territory, you get on with one another. That's how it is. You work things out. And like Larry Elder says, he grew up, he experienced racism once, but a hell of a lot of people jumped to his defense and condemned the racist. I probably can only point to one experience, and I don't even know if I'd call it racist. So a kid in primary school said, "Oh, you're a black fella," and because of the way he said it to me, I was a bit kind of like, I didn't think of myself. I just thought of myself as human. But I went to my teacher and I was like, "Oh, this kid called me a black fella," and she said she did the best thing she could have done for me. And she, instead of furthering the idea of becoming a victim to this kid, she said, "Well, you are." She said, "You're a black fella. I'm a white fella. We've got different backgrounds, but that's not who you are entirely. You're Jacinta, but don't get upset by this." And we're not doing that enough. So what we're doing is we're reaffirming people's victimhood as opposed to going, "You're better than that. You're not defined by the color of your skin. You're not confined to this small space. You're bigger. You're beyond that." And the whole world came through Alice Springs. So I met people from many different backgrounds. Part of Mum being Warrnambool was the fact that she'd adopt people into our family. So, I had people with skin names. I had like a sister from Hong Kong. She became a Numbidinba. She was my sister. I had a French-Canadian brother. I have a Dutch-Irish sister. My mum would, bring people into our family and make them part of our lives. And that's what it meant to be someone growing up in Alice Springs, an Australian. We welcome other human beings into our lives, and we want to understand one another, and we like to express our differences and celebrate the fact that the next person isn't going to be exactly like you, think exactly like you, talk exactly like you, which is what is expected by Aboriginal Australians. And I could see the politics of other parts of the country creeping into the Northern Territory, and now it's here, unfortunately. And I remind people, especially my family, who I see starting to take on this victim mentality, and remind them who they are, where they came from, and the fact that the way I was brought up also in terms of my traditional Aboriginal upbringing is that any kids that were born in Alice Springs, regardless of their background, their baby spirit leapt from the earth and into their mum's belly, just like mine did, just like all my family's baby spirits have. And we carry the spiritual essence of the creator ancestor of that part of the country, regardless of what their background is. So I was brought up with this arms open acceptance of other human beings, and other little ones who are born in this country. They carry the Jukuraba inside them just as much as I do as well. And now we've got this this narrative that the left has pushed onto us, that we've all got to be put into these little categories, depending on our skin color, depending on our sexuality, which is someone's personal business. I don't care what your sexuality is, that's your business. Why should it be something that you then become categorized and part of? It's as Josephine said, it is all very condescending, and it's so incredibly divisive. And for Aboriginal Australians to not have the opportunity, like my gay nephew told me here I go, I shouldn't have called him gay because really I've just gone and contradicted myself. But he made the point to me. He said, you know what? It is far easier to come out as gay nowadays than it is to come out as an Aboriginal conservative. And we live in a democracy in 2020.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You have these people running around talking about human rights and that, and then I looked at the charter there of the human rights on Indigenous people and that from the UN, and they actually talk about that you have the right to self-determination and self-expression. But as soon as you express yourself and say, well, I'm voting for the Liberal Party or I'm voting for the National Party, then you get attacked and abused, saying, oh, no, you overstepped the line. You have become, a whitey. I actually went to a conference when I was chair of the Prime Minister's Indigenous Council, and this was all these Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics. And I was talking about how we need to have business people to lift our communities out of poverty that can create jobs and that. And one of the people said, bourgeois blacks. And I looked at around the room and I said, if you ever seen anything more white in your life, is a bunch of professors and doctors working in white universities. And here you are slagging off against other people who are trying to get a job and a feed for their family, and you're calling them bourgeois blacks. And I couldn't think of anything more bourgeois than a professor at a university. I just found that really insulting. And the other thing too about, we always said that, they used to say, oh, all Aboriginals are dirty, all Aboriginals are bad people. And back when I was a young kid growing up, and we've always argued the case that you should judge us by our character and judge us by what we're trying to do in that.
Yeah, I'd love to, if that's okay, go to a point. When you talk about the university sectors, if you're not, I won't mention you, Anthony, but a lot of the Aboriginal people
Yeah, I wasn't going to guide you, Anthony.
Are full-on Marxists. I mean, this BLM stuff, Patty Gibson, no Aboriginal ancestry, comes out as a leader of it. And then we've got Pascoe there as well. I think you'll find, if you did a study on it, that the people who are claiming the most racism are probably the most privileged. A lot of them are fake Aboriginals, and I'm going to say that straight, with no community experience whatsoever. And I think a lot of the people, most of the people on the ground I've met are actually conservatives. But the problem is, which we're addressing, is they don't understand what being a conservative is about. And everybody, every human being does not want people controlling them and the state controlling them. They control them through emotional manipulation. Like they'll say, oh, this person's been appointed by the government and they're going to come in and, trash your culture and steal your kids. They play on these emotional points. This is where people who understand what's going on have to also take some accountability, like the Minister for Education, because this has been going on for way too long. You've also got a Vice-Chancellor who's got no academic peer-reviewed publications in Western Sydney, asking university students, all of them, to sign on to Marxist BLM, which actually is very anti-democratic, and it's a real worry. It's a real worry, and the key is, we've got to move together as one mob now, and we've got to highlight how these people are trying to be so divisive to all Australians.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next segment here, and we've got another a quick video from Uncle Tom. If we could have a look at that, and then we can continue our conversation.
There's a technical problem.
Yeah, oh, gee. Yeah, there is a bit of a technical problem there, so I do apologise to people listening. And I didn't hear it as well. It was but anyway, we'll move on and we'll talk about some of these issues and that. Like one of the things that really concerns me is that we in the last 30 years, 40 years, we've moved away from this and fought the struggles. You've got the civil rights movement, you've got all these other movements of moving away, judging from people on their colour. And actually that people should be able to be judged on what they're doing. And so their character, you know, I actually got into the same discussion with a person who was going on about colour all the time. And I said, well, you know, Martin Luther King said, I want my children to be judged by their character. I don't want them to be judged by their colour. And yet here we are now judging, you know, white privilege, other people and that. And any dark person or black person who doesn't toe that line is abused. And I just find all that stuff being very sad, because it's really going to. What is the future for our kids in regard to this area, Jacinta?
Well, it makes it much more difficult for our kids to freely, you know, express their own thought. They feel like they have to think and say things in a particular way. That it's encouraging bullying as opposed to alleviating bullying. You know, as is mentioned in the documentary, that for African Americans, there are now restrictions being placed on them similar to the restrictions of the Jim Crow era. But it's largely, one, because of the liberals over there that are pushing this. But, you know, African Americans that are buying into it and, you know, putting that kind of pressure onto other African Americans who happen to be conservative. And look, I think the movement, the Black conservative movement over there is really a wonderful thing to see. It's taking off at the moment. But we're really well behind the 8 ball here in Australia. There is a lot of fear, a lot of Aboriginal people who fear simply having an opinion, full stop. And I mean, the restrictions are being put on us as well. You know, this time last year I was on a speaking tour and I had people who didn't even know what I was talking about in my speaking tour, which was largely all very personal stuff about my own family's personal journeys and the losses of family members that I've experienced, and, you know, a range of different issues. But just because I'm Indigenous doesn't mean that I'm talking about you. And we're told all the time, you know, you don't represent all Aboriginal people. Well, duh, and I don't claim to. And there were, you know, I was abused at one of my speaking tour events where there were protesters. They had no idea what I was there to talk about. They were quiet all the way up until I said I wouldn't do. I didn't want to hold a welcome to country at my event because I'm a traditionalist in that regard, and my mob, we didn't do that. We didn't hold, you know, it's a contemporary construct. So therefore, I don't want to buy into it, and I have every right, my individual human right, not to do so. I don't have to do these things because supposedly, as a contemporary construct, culture dictates that that's what I have to do. There is no written law that says that, and I had a really defamatory media release put out about me by the Coffs Harbour Land Council. And now I've come to learn today there's an event that I've been invited to speak at called Disrupted in Perth in November. I've been contacted today because there are Noongar people who are upset about it. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how they are going to attempt to shut me down, considering they don't even know what I'm going to be talking about to begin with. I'm certainly not going to be talking about them. I don't know who they are, so I wouldn't be talking about them. But the fact that we have these restrictions put on us, that we cannot practice free speech in a democratic country in 2020, we cannot be recognised as individuals on the content of that character, as opposed to just being put through the mill because of the colour of our skin, because somehow, because we're Indigenous, we belong to all Indigenous people, and they can tell us how to think, feel, act, and where we can and can't speak publicly. And, you know, I mean, there's a denial of our fundamental human rights, and yet they think it's okay. It's ridiculous. You know, my kids, they've got us, obviously they've got me as an example, and I know that they speak their mind, and I'm thankful, so thankful that they're strong like that.
Yeah. Talking about disruption, we've been able to get that a video back now, and we'd like to show it and see how we go.
I grew up being told of my disadvantages, that this country is unfair to Black people.
You're Black, you're not gonna be able to do it. You can't get this, you can't get that, you can't get bank loans.
When you walk into a bank, you will get a loan more easily if you are a white guy.
The ideology is implanted into you subconsciously to believe these things.
We don't teach our children to have confidence.
It's like we're brainwashed to think, is it because I'm Black? Why are they looking at me like that?
How many of you feel judged? How many of you feel feared on sight when people see you? Show of hands.
We teach them to be scared of this country, to be scared of the world that they live in. Woe is me. I'm disadvantaged. I'll never accomplish anything. Then you won't accomplish anything.
It will be a self-fulfilling prophecy for you. If you determine that you can't be successful or that you're oppressed, then you are oppressed.
Well, that was great to get that back on there. But it is a self-prophecy in a sense that if you keep on putting people down, I remember going back to the 1980s, I attended an education conference, and people kept on talking about unemployment and Aboriginals, bad health and Aboriginals and that. And by the end of it, and I'm a very optimistic, strong person, by the end of it, I was just devastated, thinking we must be the poorest, terrible people and got no future for ourselves. But then I go back to my parents. My parents always said, work is a virtue. Education is a virtue. It is about moving ahead and being able to make a better life for yourself and make a better life for your kids and your grandkids. And I just think we're putting too much fear and too much division between us and the rest of Australia. And I just find that funny, because I have some great friends who come from who are white. I have some great friends who, you know, I went to school with. You know, there's one guy there, Mario. He's Italian, and we've been mates for over half a century now. I know some people don't believe I look that old, but yes, it is. And I just find it funny, disgraceful that we've got this division between ourselves now. And it's been promoted through a whole wide range of educational institutions and some of our so-called leadership out there are saying these things. So yeah, Josephina, is this how do we counter this stuff?
Well, I wanted to go back to one of your other points. You know, we've got to look behind who created these things like white privilege. There's a woman called McIntosh. I mean, she's one of the most wealthy people going, you know, in one of the most wealthy areas of the US. This was actually designed back from the Frankfurt School. It's cultural Marxism. Unfortunately, we have a militant union who are controlling the education system in Australia. Absolutely. Hence why they want to ethnically cleanse us with Pasco's garbage. Seriously, I'm very concerned about this and children not actually learning to read and write, because if you can read and write, okay, you have a lot of options. If you can't read and write, and like in Wilcannia, we found no computers, and you need a computer these days to be able to write complaint letters and to hold people to account in a democracy, right? If you don't have the basic skills, that's what our education system that costs the taxpayers a lot of money should be doing. I believe that the key to winning this is the Aboriginal Aussies, or the original Aussies, and the Aussies uniting for a common purpose. And how we're going to do that is to help Aboriginal women and men in particular become their own advocates, because they know what they need for their families. The state has encroached on everything. And this is, I think, I don't condone any of it, but some of the reactions are reactions of people without power who don't feel who are scared that people are going to make decisions on their behalf all the time. And what has happened in the last the end of the 70s, you'd know more than me, Uncle Warren, is that we've had the communists have had control, and people have land, but they can't, develop it themselves. Aboriginal people should be the richest people in the Asia Pacific with the amount of land they so-called own, but it's in a title they can't get a mortgage on. So I think the key is bringing Australia together, because when we all vote and when we take our vote, we have a voice. There are lots of Aboriginal people who don't vote. In a small part of Western New South Wales, we've actually enrolled 500 people to vote. And we've got a much younger population, 50% under 25. And, you'd get calls, Jacinta would get calls, we all get calls about people going, well, what do I do about this fake Aboriginal trying to take over my land council? What do I do about this? And in a way, they feel that the system has been set up and it's in concrete. We need to inspire and bring up the new Australian leaders, both black and white, who are actually going to work for Australia's best interests. And we've had a problem, not just in this area, but generally with people who are not acting for Australia's best interests, in my view.
Look, we'll continue this in a few minutes because we've just got Herman Cain video up to look at that. And you did raise some very important points there, which I'd like to continue on in regard to this topic.
Working for the Department of the Navy. The same day that I started, another white gentleman named Robert started working there also. We had very similar jobs. So the first 12 months, I got outstanding performance 4 quarters in a row. Second year, outstanding performance 4 quarters in a row. And Robert got outstanding performance. But Robert was getting his GS salary increase at least 2 months sooner than me. So I went to Wayne, my supervisor, and said, Robert and I are both doing a great job. He said, yeah. So why is he getting little increases quicker than me? He said, he has a master's degree. I said, oh, it's not because he's white? Nope. He has a master's degree. So you know what I did? I didn't get mad. I went and got me a master's degree. There are only 4 rungs to this class. Went back. Sat down with Wayne. I said, well, I got a master's degree. I said, the next time you have opening for a promotion, I said, keep me in mind. See you around. And not long after that, they had a special project called Rocket Assisted Projector. They had to have someone who was going to be the GS-13 supervisory mathematician to do the special ballistics on this rocket assisted projector. I got the promotion. And I had 8 white people working for me. It was all about performance, not the color of your skin. So since I now had that master's degree and I had proved myself, I got the job. When I decided to leave Dalvin, never forget the department head, and he called me in for an exit interview. And I never forget Russ. I think he's deceased now. He said, you have taught me something. I said, what? He said, I had never worked with a black person before. You taught me don't judge somebody by the color of their skin.
What a great line, that last line, you taught me something, never judge me by the color of my skin. There's things you can't do. You can't change the color of your skin. So this idea that you're trapped in this skin color is just, to me, it's just nonsense. Yeah, what all white people are enslavers and terrible people? Well, that's just not true. All black people are oppressed and uneducated and can't improve their livelihood? That's just a whole lot of nonsense. I just find some of this stuff so crazy. It's just and at a time in the world where we had more freedoms, We had more opportunities. We live longer. We don't have laws that discriminate against us anymore. Not when I was a kid. The first 13 years of my life, I lived under the Aborigines Protection Act in New South Wales, a segregationist act. That's all gone. That's all gone. And there is so much you can do with your life now and move ahead. I just find this bizarre situation now where everything is racist. It is totally crazy, and what people are being taught and how they carry on. Talk about disruption! I just knocked over my camera.
Right.
getting all excited here, throwing my hands around.
Yeah.
Anyway, Tony, I'll just hand it over to you now.
Yeah, look, I mean, saying, you just said, there's all this racism, or, people saying that there's all this racism everywhere. It was about 8 or 9 years ago, I wrote an opinion piece in The Australian, and I quoted Larry Elder. And I'll just read that bit to you here. Larry Elder, when discussing the problems facing African Americans in his book, What's Race Got to Do With It, a great book, by the way, writes that crying racism avoids the awful, horrible truth that just maybe the victim, in inverted commas, the victim's action or inaction accounts for disparate outcomes. Elder's point, and here in Australia, bringing it back to Australia, is illustrated in the example of the unacceptably high incarceration rates for Aboriginal people in this country, which is often cast as a racism problem. So we've got to get away, as Elder's saying, stop hiding behind the word racism, stop making the accusation when it's not warranted, and address the real issues, the ones which, all four of us and many others have been doing for quite a while now, which brings on the criticism of coconut.
I promise I'll keep my hands to myself now so I don't knock over the screen again and behave myself. But you hit on a very important point there. You've raised the issue, and we're going for this Black Lives Matter stuff. One thing that sort of really hit me was I had some white friends and they come to me and they said, "Oh my God, that people are talking about 432 Indigenous people have been killed since in incarceration since the Royal Commission in 1992." And they said, "This is terrible. The police and the corrective services are killing all this." And I said, wait a minute. Let's get to the facts. I always love this thing about the left and that they always say, "Oh, let's get the truth talking." And this is why I call this show Truth Talking, so we can actually get some real truth. And when I did the inquiry, I headed up the inquiry in South Australian prisons, and it wasn't particularly Aboriginal. It was about the prison systems and how we could stop reoffending. And because 70% of crime is part of reoffending. And so if we could cure that, then we've saved 70% of victims, we save 70% of crime, and we could live in a safer, better community. I just find it bizarre that people talk about, just make things up, I think. They just talk about, all these Aboriginals are in jail because of racism, or they were in jail because of traffic fines and all this type of stuff. When we did the research there, and we looked across Australia, over 56% of those Aboriginals who were in jail not just for violence, but very serious violent crimes. And in most cases, something like over 70% of those cases, it was Aboriginal against Aboriginal women and other people. We cannot, I'm a great believer, if you don't have data, you don't have research, you don't have information, then how can you deal with the real issues that are affecting our communities? And so, and this is where Josephine and Jacinta and Tony, you have copped the flack over in regard to raising this very issue of violence in our communities. I always say, if you don't think there's a problem in our communities, how come about 36% that an Indigenous woman is 36 times more likely to be in hospital from a domestic violence situation? I just find this so, you know, I just find this stuff nonsense. This is not to say that all Aboriginal, and this is they chuck in your face, oh, you're saying all Aboriginal men are violent. So no, I'm not. There's 600,000 Aboriginal people in Australia. How many Aboriginals are in jail? That makes out about 990,000 or more Aboriginals are not involved in that system, are not going to jail, and are doing and getting on with life. And I think we need to start focusing on the real issues. I raised what was that, a Q&A where a woman talked about the Fauna and Flora Act. Well, there's no such act. I got the ABC to fact check it, and I knew that because I knew a few professors of law at New South Wales University and Sydney University. You know, if you want to find an act, it's very easy to find. You just go to the library and there it is. No one could find this act. It never should. And I just find that, why do they have to make things up? You know, all they have to do is look at the Protection Act, which causes enough problems. You know, you look at that case I spoke about last week in regard to the stolen salaries from Aboriginal workers. I find that a lot of this stuff, they just sort of make it up, and then they just run with all this stuff. And I have a great fear that our kids are going to grow up believing this stuff. Any of you want to jump in, just jump in and have a go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a go. I'm always happy to have a go. Look, I mean, it's so true. And, you know, and one of the reasons why we're behind the 8 ball, and certainly in comparison to African Americans and the conservative movement over there, is the fact that it comes down to education as well. And the language barriers certainly do exist for a lot of Indigenous Australians, but over and over, Aboriginal people are taken advantage of. You know, it's a very emotional argument that, you know, people are drawn into, like the figure, you know, they keep it simple. You know, if you want to, but there's always an ideology behind it. There's always an agenda, like the Black Lives Matter movement, and using the figure of 430 to Indigenous Australians having died in custody. Well, you know, around within a similar time frame, 951 Aboriginal Australians were murdered, and 765 of those were murdered by other Aboriginal people. I mean, 432 pales in comparison to that number, but people, you know, there's a lack of education, and it's not just Indigenous Australians that are suffering at the moment because of this Marxist agenda that exists throughout education institutions in our country. It's not just Indigenous Australians that are suffering, who aren't getting an education, and who are being indoctrinated by, you know, the unions are certainly there. Josephine mentioned the unions, and just as African Americans in the US have been used by the left, and it's well documented in the documentary, the liberal movement, and the fact that the Democrats, you know, ran the KKK, and it was all about controlling the black vote back then. It's the same thing is happening for Indigenous Australians. Like Indigenous Australia, you know, conservatives are terrible at promoting what we've achieved, and terrible at pushing back against, you know, leftist propaganda. And, you know, the fact remains that the unions who are currently out in force in pre-polling in remote communities and badgering people to get them to vote for Labor, when I brought this up on Facebook and I got criticised, you know, how can you bring our history up? This is by a leftist. Well, it's like, well, you know, the left talks about 1788, so why can't I talk about the 1930s and the 1960s when, you know, the unions were embedded in the white Australian movement. They didn't want to lose jobs to ethnic minorities, including Aboriginal Australians. They fought against the equal pay decision. They fought against it to begin with, and only wanted to give it to Indigenous people if they were union members. But then once they realised, they only turned around and supported it once they realised that it was in fact going to put Aboriginal people out of a job. And yet they go out to Kalkarinji, to the Wave Hill walk-off every year, year in, year out, and pretend to be the champions of Indigenous Australians, when all they are doing are manipulating the vote for their favour. And I'm sick to death of this utter contempt for Indigenous Australians that we see the left using Indigenous Australians, preying on the fact that they are limited in terms of their education and language use to manipulate them for the vote. And there's a lot of misconceptions out there about, you know, Conservatives are apparently racist. Well, you know, it was a Conservative government that, you know, it was a coalition government that granted Indigenous Australians the right to vote. It was a coalition government that granted full citizenship rights in 1964. But even up until then, in states and territories, it was coalition governments that were slowly giving Indigenous Australians, because we were all British subjects until the Citizenship Act was brought in 1948. But it was coalition governments that was extending the citizenship to Indigenous Australians prior to, in states and territories, prior to 1964. It was the coalition government who held the referendum. You know, it was their initiative. And obviously the equal pay decision was a coalition government initiative as well. Historically, you know, we have contributed a hell of a lot in terms of Conservatives to the benefit of Indigenous Australians. And for some reason, well, because there's a lack of education and because the propaganda push from the left, the Indigenous Australians believe the nonsense which is carried on and carried on and carried on. And it is largely to our detriment. It's to the detriment of the most vulnerable Australians, Aboriginal Australians in the nation. And it's got to stop. And of course, you know, it's going to be a very bloody slow process, obviously, because education is a huge factor.
Can I just make a quick comment? Quick comment.
Yeah, you got to be quick because we're running out of time.
I will.
Yeah, so.
Well, one of the people who made comment, this is for Dopey Denny, not one of us here in this panel are claiming to speak on behalf of all Aboriginal people. We're just up here offering our opinion. So you got that, Dopey Denny? Thanks.
Yes. Look, he just proved the point with that. Sorry.
BLM, they should actually be trying to stop the drugs going into Aboriginal communities. That would have a big thing. They should have a campaign. But the thing is, they could stop it overnight. But these people who've had control got to take responsibility because it's been going on for too long. There's a Crime Commission report about it. And that's what they should be fighting for.
Yeah. Look, he just proved our point. As I said, none of us here has said that we speak for Aboriginal people or any people, even black, white, green, pink or purple. What we're doing is putting our viewpoint across and dealing with the facts that are happening out there. Now, we've got to wind up now. So look, I've got to thank people for coming along. I've got to thank the panel for giving you time up to be on the show. Next week, we're going to have COVID-19 from the frying pan to the fire, which will be looking at the economy with in the issues that COVID-19 has done. And our panelists are Joe Hildebrand, of course, the TV celebrity and journalist. We have Caroline De Rosso, author and a lawyer. And we have Steve Baxter, tech entrepreneur and one of the sharks in the Shark Tank. Sorry. So, look, thank you for watching. We'll catch up to you next Wednesday. And enjoy the week. And I hope we gave you a lot of information. If you want to chase us up afterwards, that's fine. Come to our book Facebook page. And if you want to pass on messages to anyone else, do that. And we'll very happily pass them on to the panelists. Thank you.